Can I say, first of all, what a real pleasure it is to be in Eastham, to be in Wirral, to be in Merseyside, in this great area of the country, which is more pro-European than any other area of England, which has always led the way in fighting for jobs for people, which has showed huge courage in fighting when the Hillsborough disaster happened as well, for justice for the people of Liverpool. And it is a real pleasure to be speaking alongside Mick and alongside Justin, who this morning have shown that their in-depth knowledge of what's really happening to Britain is in stark contrast to the bluster we have from the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who doesn't even answer a question and cannot answer a question about what is going to happen. And it's a pleasure to be with Alison, whom I've worked with for so many years. You can have no better representative in the House of Commons. And whether it is fighting for food banks and against poverty, or whether it's fighting on this European issue, she is known not just in this area, but throughout the country for what she does. And you need to re-elect her to be the Member of Parliament whenever the election happens. You know, I didn't know until I got here.
The check is in the post, Gordon.
I didn't know until I got here this morning that I was speaking in a church hall. Some of you may know my father was a minister of the church, and I was brought up going to church services. My father used to say, look, when you go to a church, there's lots of different political persuasions here. You've got to be sometimes very careful how you put your position. And he said a friend of his, whenever his own party won, the minister would choose the hymn on the Sunday, "Now Thank We All Our God." But if his party lost, he would choose, "Dear Lord and Father of mankind, forgive our foolish ways." And if the other party or a third party won, "Oh, God works in mysterious ways." There's wonders. But I am so pleased to be here because we are launching today with Hope Not Hate and with Alison and with Justin and with Unite Union, this campaign to stop a no-deal Brexit. Now, this area has always been pro-European. In fact, you had 10% higher vote for Europe. And I have come from another area where I was in a BBC interview, and I heard this spokesman for Brexit speaking, and the interviewer was asking him, why are you so against Europe? Why are you always just fulminating against Europe? And the guy was giving him no answers, and the interviewer said, is it ignorance or is it apathy? And the guy replied, I don't know, and I don't care. That's the standard of case we're getting from the Brexiteers. But today, this campaign is saying one thing. Whether you were for Brexit or against Brexit, whether you were a voter for Leave or for Remain, we must all come together to stop a no-deal Brexit. And the reason I say this is very clear. If the government cannot give guarantees about the supply of components to the car industry coming into the country, if the government cannot give guarantees that food supplies are not at risk coming into the country, if the government cannot give guarantees that medical supplies, which we depend on coming in from Europe into the country, are going to come to the country, then no responsible Prime Minister, no Cabinet Minister, no government should be proposing a no-deal Brexit on October the 31st. You know, they say they are taking back control. But just think of it, on October the 31st, we lose control of our medical supplies. We lose control of our food supplies. We lose control of the car components coming into this country. And that's why we should all come together to oppose a no deal from whatever stance you had in the referendum. Now, take the car industry. We've just heard from Mick and from Justin some of the facts. Every car, the typical car, has about 30,000 components. 15,000 of them come from outside Britain. 12,000 of them come, on average, from the European Union. Most cars have 15 countries of the European Union contributing to the makeup of the car, whether it's the panels or whether it's the engine or whatever. And if you shorten the supply chain, and if you disrupt it, And if there are holdups at Dover or Calais or wherever the ports are that these components are coming in, then the just-in-time production of the car industry is thrown out, the cars become far more expensive to make, and you start to lose your car industry as a whole. And let us remember that we produce 1.5 million cars in Britain, but only 280,000 of them are sold to British buyers. So 1.2 million cars that we produce are being produced for the foreign market. And most of these are being produced, as we've just heard, in Vauxhall as well, for European Union sales. And if these producers, like Vauxhall, if they decide that it's going to be cheaper to make the cars in other parts of Europe where there are no tariffs, where there are no hold-ups, when the supply chain is working and not disrupted, then we stand at risk of losing many of the 200,000 jobs in the car industry and the 800,000 jobs that depend on it. So this is not just about some hold-up on October the 31st for a few minutes or a few hours or a few days. This is about the very future of the car industry on which Ellesmere Port and this area depend. And that is why we've got to fight against a no-deal Brexit, because no car industry job should be put at risk by the dogma of this government. And you know also, I was proud to be involved with the Vauxhall workers and with Unite and all those who fight for jobs at Vauxhall 10 years ago. But you know, the most important decisions are about to be made about the future of the car industry. Because we're going to have electric cars, we're going to have driverless cars, we're going to have non-diesel cars. All these changes are being made. And every car company like Vauxhall is making its decision now as to where this new investment is to be located. And it's billions of pounds of investment that will decide the future of 800,000 jobs in total. And if we have a no-deal Brexit, we put all that future at risk. So we're fighting for the car industry, but we're also fighting for the supply of food in this country. You know that 30% of our food is imported from Europe. We used to be 75% self-sufficient in food. We're now only 60% self-sufficient. 30% of the food comes from Europe, so 1 in every 3 items that you buy in a food shop, it's coming from mainland Europe. The other 10 or 11% from the rest of the world. And so we depend on the supply of food into our shops from mainland Europe. But look at the government's own document on this. They say that the most likely outcome is hold-ups at the Channel ports. They say that perhaps 50% of vehicles will not get through in time on the first few days. They say that even after 3 months, perhaps 40% of vehicles are going to be delayed. So the supply of food into our shops is affected because 30% of our food comes from the very people that we're now declaring an economic war against by a no-deal Brexit. And you know what then happens? Food prices shoot up. Not only is the supply of vegetables and fruit, which come from abroad mainly, affected, but so too is the price. And if the pound devalues, as has already happened, and if supply is more limited, then you'll see the prices going up. And the Cabinet Secretary has already said he expects a 10% rise. The food retailers yesterday, in reply to Michael Gove when he was on television, said it would be even more than 10%. Now, who can afford a 10% rise in food prices if you're dependent on Social Security benefits? Who can afford it if you're dependent with low wages in this country? Who can afford it even with the average wage in this country? A 10, 15 or 20% rise in food prices, then a rise in fuel prices, and then, of course, more children, more families in poverty. And I've just visited the food bank in Liverpool, and I've just visited the various community enterprise designed to get people out of poverty. 40,000 children in poverty, 80,000 food parcels, and that is before a no-deal Brexit pushing up the prices of food. So we cannot allow a no-deal Brexit to happen if we are going to stop poverty rising in this country. It's not simply about a few days delay in food. It's about the cost of living for millions of people who depend on food supplies coming into this country and on decent food prices. And I'll tell you the other thing, because I know about this from my own family, the supply of medical consignments into this country. Did people know that 1 million medical packs, medical consignments, come in every day into Britain? 1 million, 37 million packages a month, 400 million a year. So a large number of the drugs and treatments on which we depend start in Europe. And they cannot always be stockpiled because they've got to be used within a certain date. And they cannot be afforded to be brought in by air because of the sheer cost of doing so. So immediately the channel ports and other ports, because 3/4 come through these channel ports, are held up. The supply of medical drugs starts to become a problem. Now, take EpiPens. I know about this in my family. In the last year, because of a fire in a factory in Germany, the supply of EpiPens was reduced to the National Health Service. And so they had to increase the use-by date to lengthen it. They had to bring injectors back that they were going to throw out. They had to cut the prescriptions from 2 to 1, because normally a prescription involves 2 EpiPens. Now, because most of the supply of EpiPens, essential for those people suffering from allergies, come from mainland Europe, any disruption in the supply affects those people who depend on EpiPens for their very survival. And think of diabetics. Diabetics, and there may be some here, who depend on insulin. There are 1 million people in this country who depend on insulin. But where do most of the supplies of insulin come? They come from mainland Europe. So the disruption in the supply of insulin, which has got to be brought in a timely way, so it's not out of date, depends on keeping our trade moving with the rest of Europe. And look at the flu virus. I think people now know that there's an Australian flu virus that has been hitting that continent, and now we've had to reconfigure the flu vaccine that is issued every year. And so the supply of that flu vaccine, again, is dependent mainly on European producers and not on British producers. And it's brought into the country again in a timely way so it doesn't become out of date. But because of the Australian flu epidemic and the reconfiguration, there's 1 million doses that cannot come into the country before October the 31st. And many people think will be delayed after October the 31st. So just at the time when you want the vaccine to be available to avoid any problems with flu in the winter months and for the most vulnerable people in the country, then it's put at risk. And then take cancer, because there are isotopes that we use in the treatment and the investigation of cancer, again, radioisotopes produced in Europe and not mainly in Britain. And they have to come into the country, but their use-by date is very limited. And again, the cost of flying them in by air would be so expensive that it would be prohibited for the National Health Service. And so the supply of these particular medical consignments is put at risk as well. So wherever you look, and I've only given you 4 examples, we are such an interdependent and integrated economy that the minute something goes wrong in our relationships with Europe, the minute also many problems of the supply of drugs, of food, of components to the car industry arise. Now, this no-deal Brexit is not the Brexit that people who voted for Brexit were promised. I remember 2016. In fact, I came here during 2016, during the referendum, and what did they say? It would be smooth and orderly. The negotiations would be over in an afternoon, David Davis said. Remember that? It'd be so easy. We'd have a trade agreement by now, and there'll be no problems at all. In the 2017 manifesto, Theresa May said they wouldn't leave unless it was smooth and orderly. Boris Johnson's Leave campaign in 2016, it said they would safety first. That's right, safety first, no sudden stop, they said. That was in the literature. And of course, Boris Johnson said he would stay in the single market. Nigel Farage even said he was modelling it on Norway and Switzerland, and that was the best way of looking at the future. Nobody said it was going to be a no-deal crashing out, falling over the cliff on October the 31st. And so the no-deal that we're getting is not the Brexit that we were promised, and therefore MPs have every right to vote against it because of the effect it has on their constituents. And And what about like what's happened in the last few days? Did they not say that Brexit was about restoring parliamentary democracy? Did they not say it was about British sovereignty being upheld? And what did they do? In desperation, they suspend Parliament. 7 cabinet ministers are on record saying that to suspend Parliament would be a total affront to democracy. They're on record as saying it would be something that would be so completely unacceptable. This rogues gallery of 7, or you might say prorogues gallery of 7, who are putting our future at risk. So every single MP, in my view, whether they were for Brexit or against Brexit, has now a clear duty. Yes, you listen to everything your constituents say. That is the job of being a member of Parliament. And yes, Brexit revealed a number of problems that I wish the government had dealt with instead of doing what they're doing now. But MPs also have a duty to listen to what their constituents are saying to them about their individual plight. And if I see a constituent or a family where poverty is being imposed because of a no-deal Brexit, if I see a patient of the National Health Service in my constituency who's going to lose the medical supplies that are vital to her life and to her health, if I see an industry in my constituency that is going under or threatened to go under because the components that are essential for the production are never going to reach them in time to keep the production process going, then I have a duty in conscience to say to people, whatever your view was on Brexit, we cannot allow a no-deal Brexit to happen in this country. And I say we've got a limited amount of time now. MPs have got to awaken to their responsibilities, and they can vote in the next few days, and I believe and hope that they will vote to stop the no-deal Brexit by passing a law outlawing that possibility. And we all have a responsibility, because we have got to make our views clear right across this country, each and every one of us. Forget what our party labels have been. Forget what vote people had in 2016. Remember, our first duty is to the welfare and safety of the people of our families, our communities, and our country. And if you weigh that up, and if all conscience you think about what the effects are going to be, then there is no deal Brexit should be off the table. No deal Brexit means for many people a no meal Brexit. Means for most people in this country a no debate Brexit, a no democracy Brexit. Let's stop no deal directly in its tracks. And let's do it now. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much.